Emily, is Grandpa behaving himself?
Oh yes, well, kind of.
Injuring his leg, old people can be such a nuisance. I wish they'd think about those of us who have to take care of them.
Patricia, that's not a nice way to say it.
It's fine. He's already declining quite a bit. I can't handle the fuss of old people, but you're used to it, so you'll be fine.
The other day, my husband's grandfather Michael fell in the garden and injured his leg. It's not a serious injury, but he's already 82 years old. Because of his age, we're having him rest in bed just to be safe, so it doesn't get worse. My mother-in-law won't even go near him, let alone take care of him. I'm Emily, 30 years old. I married 3 years ago and live with my husband Daniel's family. My husband was my boss at the company where I worked, a company founded by his grandfather. When I joined 8 years ago, my father-in-law was already the president, and my grandfather-in-law was the chairman. But back then, the grandfather was still handling all the important tasks and responsibilities of the company. 2 years ago, when Grandpa turned 80, he remained chairman, but handed over most of the public duties to my father-in-law.
Michael, you've worked hard all this time. Now leave the company matters to Christopher and take it easy.
My mother-in-law said with a smile, but her words sounded sarcastic to me. Grandfather-in-law is a bit stubborn, but a fair and kind person with a good reputation. In contrast, my father-in-law seems somewhat immature, never expressing his opinions clearly and utterly unreliable compared to Grandpa. And he always does whatever my mother-in-law says. My grandmother-in-law has already passed away, and I never met her. My husband and I started dating when we worked together on the same product planning team 3 years after I joined the company. My husband, who was energetically leading the team, seemed reliable to me, though a bit self-righteous. Maybe I felt that way because I lost my father early and grew up with just my mother. My mother also passed away from illness 2 years ago, and now I have no family other than my in-laws. Shortly after I got married, my mother fell ill and needed care, so I quit my job to take care of her. The fact that my husband's family didn't object was probably due to a single comment from Grandpa.
It's only natural to take care of the mother who raised you alone. Don't worry and take good care of her.
Thanks to that, I was able to be by my mother's side every day for a year without financial worries until she passed away. My mother-in-law seemed a bit dissatisfied, but I was truly grateful. However, since Grandpa handed over the company to my father-in-law, everyone's attitudes towards him has gradually changed. They no longer listen to his opinions as much. And I can't shake the feeling that they're treating him carelessly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But watching my mother-in-law and husband's behavior, I can't help but feel that way. My father-in-law's attitude is non-committal, but it feels like he's ignoring Grandpa, as if he's no longer needed since he's practically retired. Watching my in-laws' behavior, I feel somewhat angry. Hey, don't you think your attitude, Patricia, and yours too, is a bit cold towards Grandpa?
So what's the big deal?
Grandpa tries to talk to you and you barely respond. You don't even try to help him.
Like I have time to deal with old people. You can take care of Grandpa. You're the one with the free time.
You don't have to talk like that.
Quiet. I'm tired from work. Don't nag me about unnecessary things.
This is how it goes. No matter what I say, they won't listen to me. My grandfather-in-law doesn't say anything to his family about this. Now I'm the only one who talks to my grandfather-in-law at home. Grandpa, the weather is nice today. Shall we go for a little walk outside? Your leg seems to be healing well, and I think it will be good rehabilitation.
Thank you. Let's go out for a bit then.
When the two of us went to the park, there were several families with children playing around. My grandfather-in-law looked at the scene with joy.
Christopher and Daniel had times like that too.
Grandpa?
I was busy with work and couldn't take care of the children much. Maybe that's why I couldn't raise Christopher and Daniel properly.
My grandfather-in-law said with a slightly sad face, almost like he was talking to himself. Christopher is my father-in-law, and Daniel is my husband. I think about how everyone can be kinder to my grandfather-in-law, but I can't come up with a good idea. But then, my in-laws suggested building a house for my grandfather-in-law.
This house is over 50 years old, right? The layout is bad. It's hard to use, but instead of spending money on repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location.
A new house?
Michael is getting older, and it's good that he only got injured last time, but we never know what will happen. So let's make the house barrier-free so we won't have trouble if care is needed.
I see.
We can even put Michael's room in the middle so everyone can take care of him easily.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Right, so it's settled then. And Michael, about the cost?
If it's a house for all of us, I'll take care of it. Talk to Mr. Jones about the money.
Typical Michael. Thank you, we appreciate it.
My mother-in-law smiled happily. It seems to me that they only flatter him when they want money. But if everyone takes care of my grandfather-in-law after moving to the new house, I thought there could be nothing better. Mr. Jones is the company's in-house counsel and also manages my grandfather-in-law's personal assets. My grandfather-in-law liked his character and made him in-house counsel, and it's been nearly 30 years. He's 58 now and the person my grandfather-in-law trusts the most. I've met him several times, and he seems to be a very honest person. He always cares about my grandfather-in-law's health, and sometimes I think he's more like a son than his real sons. Having such people around my grandfather-in-law makes me feel a little relieved. I wasn't informed about where or what kind of house was being built, but my mother-in-law seemed very cheerful, and the three of them were looking at interior design magazines and discussing various things, so it seemed to be going smoothly. Then, something unexpected happened. It was revealed that my grandfather-in-law had a debt of $1,820,000.
Wait, what's this about $1,820,000?
My grandfather-in-law had become a co-signer for a loan for a friend's company. But that company was in trouble, and the debt had become my grandfather-in-law's responsibility.
Wait, they're not going to take the house that's under construction, are they?
Since the contract has already been completed, and as Patricia said, it's in the president's name, so it's fine.
My mother-in-law seemed relieved at those words.
Oh, thank goodness, I'm glad we did it my way.
Listening to that conversation, I learned for the first time that the house was in my father-in-law's name. Even though my grandfather-in-law had paid for it, putting it in my father-in-law's name seemed just like something my mother-in-law would do. I also wondered why they didn't think of giving up the house to help repay the debt.
Hey, this debt is Michael's fault, and it has nothing to do with us or the company, right?
Well, it was signed in Michael's name.
Oh, good. Then there's no problem.
I couldn't understand what was good about it. But since my grandfather-in-law didn't say anything during that conversation, I didn't intervene either. After all, it's not an amount I could handle. And a few days later, my grandfather-in-law's behavior began to change gradually.
Grandpa, what would you like to eat for lunch?
Who are you calling Grandpa? I'm only 50. You have no right to call me that.
Huh?
Sorry, Emily. Right. I was lost in thought.
At first, I thought he was just deep in thought, but when it happened repeatedly, I began to feel uneasy.
Patricia, what are you doing? Where's my meal?
Grandpa, I'm Emily. Patricia is your daughter-in-law. You ate your meal earlier.
I didn't eat. Are you trying to starve me?
I wondered if my grandfather-in-law's condition was triggered by the $1,820,000 debt. And seeing that none of his family members were trying to help him might have been a double shock. What can I do for him? I tried to take my grandfather-in-law to the hospital, but he refused to go. He might not want to admit that he might have dementia. I don't want to force him, but I can't do anything on my own. I consulted my husband, but he only replied that it had nothing to do with him. I can't rely on my mother-in-law either. So I thought my father-in-law was the only option.
Yeah, I heard from Patricia and Daniel. They think it might be dementia.
Can you go to the hospital with us?
But it's not that bad yet, right? If we go to the hospital, others will find out. My father having dementia?
There are good medications now that can slow the progression.
Well, there's no need to rush. Let's watch him a little longer. Emily is here, so it'll be fine, right?
I can't help but think how unreliable these people are. I can't depend on them. Grandpa, let's go to the hospital. Let's get you properly examined.
Who are you? Where are you planning to take me? You're up to no good.
I almost cry, thinking about how my once kind grandfather-in-law has become so stubborn. But my mother-in-law just laughs, amused.
Even if he was the chairman, it's over for him now. But now everything, even the company, is all Christopher's.
Patricia, Grandpa isn't completely unaware. He's listening to everything.
He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering, dribbling. Just thinking about it gives me chills. He's nothing but a nuisance now.
How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for the family all his life. My mother-in-law's words make me angry and sad. But my grandfather-in-law just smiles.
See? This old man doesn't understand anything.
Patricia! I'm furious at my mother-in-law's laughing in words. But soon, the new house will be ready. Things might change once we move there. Since it's a house that Grandpa built, the family might show some gratitude and be kind to him. I couldn't completely abandon that faint hope. And 2 months later, the house was finally built. For days, I had been forced to pack my in-laws' and husband's belongings, while my father-in-law's and my things were mostly untouched. Even when I tried to pack my things, my in-laws and husband kept giving me tasks, so I couldn't make any progress. But I thought it would be fine to move the small things later, since this house wasn't going away. On moving day, after moving most of the things, I went to call my father-in-law, but my husband said,
"Ah, you and Grandpa can stay here.
"What?"
You can stay in this house.
We don't need any extra baggage in the new house.
In other words, you and Grandpa will live here from now on, and I'll give you Grandpa's debt too."
Well, you can at least be a housekeeper.
Hey, let's go.
Yeah, I'm coming. Good luck with all the debt repayment and live in care.
With those words, my in-laws cheerfully got into the car and left. I was stunned for a while. I couldn't immediately understand what had just happened. Were we just abandoned? And not just me, but my grandfather-in-law too. Only they would live in the new house? It took me a while to understand, because it was beyond my imagination that someone could do something so cruel. How should I explain this to my grandfather-in-law? I slowly returned to the back room. I don't mind taking care of my grandfather-in-law at all. That was my intention from the start. As I was about to timidly call out to him, who was sitting with his back to me, he seemed to sense my presence and turned around before I could speak.
Have they gone already?
My grandfather-in-law's expression, as he said that, looked completely different from the dazed look he had just months ago. To be frank, he seemed like a different person. I thought maybe a different symptom had emerged, but the next moment, my grandfather-in-law smiled. And then, his following words surprised me. As I was talking to my grandfather-in-law, Mr. Jones came.
"Chairman, have you finished getting rid of the unnecessary staff?" "Yes, it's all done. Let's go, shall we?"
Where are we going?"
"Of course, to the new house."
I left the house where I had been living, led by my grandfather-in-law, without understanding what was happening. The next month, countless calls came from my mother-in-law and husband. My grandfather-in-law said he wouldn't deal with them anymore, but I answered my husband's call because of the divorce.
Hey, Emily, is Grandpa with you? When I went to the old house, it was for sale. It's not worth $1,820,000, so you can't repay the debt. Is that why you did that?
What do you mean?
Put Grandpa on. Dad said he can't get in touch at all. That forgetful old man has done something outrageous.
I knew what he was talking about, but I wanted to hear what my husband would say.
Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Thanks to that, the executive director became the largest shareholder. And a shareholders' meeting and board meeting were held, and Dad was dismissed as president.
But the executive director is well liked, and maybe Grandpa thought he was better to hand over the company to.
The executive director must have deceived the senile old man into selling the stocks. This is invalid.
You seem to be misunderstanding something. But Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he seems more coherent than before.
What?
I, too, until that moving day, had seriously thought that my grandfather-in-law had dementia. It seems that my grandfather-in-law had been suspicious from the time my mother-in-law said she would build a house to live with him. So he devised a plan. He pretended to have dementia to see how my in-laws and husband would react. As expected, they showed their true colors one after another. In the end, they left my grandfather-in-law and me behind.
I struggled to hold back my laughter because everything went exactly as I expected,
my grandfather-in-law said. I was surprised, relieved, and a little conflicted.
To deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies.
He laughed. He seemed to have been getting regular updates on the company from the executive director and Mr. Jones. With my grandfather-in-law gone, my father-in-law and husband did as they pleased, self-righteous, completely ignoring the opinions of the employees, constant entertaining at the company's expense. He handed over the company to my father-in-law, but he was worried about the future, so he took this measure. In the end, he decided he couldn't entrust it to his son and left it to the executive director.
What about the $1,820,000 debt?
That's gone now. Indeed, my grandfather-in-law had been a guarantor for a friend's debt, but he also owned personal assets that exceeded that. After stepping back from the company's operations, he had invested in real estate and made a considerable profit. So there was no problem at all. But if I had said that, it was clear that my mother-in-law and husband would target it. That's why I only talked about the debt. The friend was the son of a benefactor who had helped my father-in-law when he was young. Moreover, since then, the countryside land that the son owned was going to be developed into a resort, and he was able to sell it at a high price, so there was no need to take on the debt.
You're kidding.
But more importantly, are you guys okay?
We're not okay. Both my father and I were denounced by the company. What should we do now?
Well, there's also the mortgage on the house.
What? What do you mean, the mortgage on the house?
Huh? Haven't you realized it yet?
The house money should have been all paid by Grandpa.
Maybe you don't remember what Grandpa said at that time. When my mother-in-law talked to my grandfather-in-law about the money, he had set the condition that if it's a house where everyone, including me, will live. In other words, if that wasn't the case, he wouldn't pay. Even if the house was in my father-in-law's name, my grandfather-in-law intended to pay if everyone was living together. That's just because you assumed Grandpa would pay and didn't look at the documents properly, right? Christopher signed without checking everything. It shows he really didn't have the qualities of a president.
You're kidding.
Afterward, my parents-in-law ended up losing the house they had built because they couldn't pay the mortgage. Now they live in an old apartment over 50 years old and are struggling to pay off the unpaid loan. My mother-in-law and husband have been contacting me alternately, saying we should all live together, but that's impossible now. My grandfather-in-law has retired from his chairman position, and now he has bought an old house in the countryside, and we are living together.
Emily, you can go and live wherever you like freely. You don't have to worry about living expenses.
My grandfather-in-law told me, but I chose to be with him. If I'm not in the way, please let me be with you. When I said that, my grandfather-in-law's eyes welled up with tears. Thanks to Mr. Jones, the divorce was finalized and procedures were taken to exclude my former father-in-law and former husband from inheritance, and I became my grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter. If anything happens to my grandfather-in-law, who has become my father, I intend to take care of him until the end. Now the two of us enjoy working in the fields together. Dad, look at this radish. It's big. In the pouring sunlight, warm moments flow. I wish for these days to continue even one day longer.
Hey. The money still hasn't been transferred. What's going on? Transferred? What are you talking about? Contrasting with my composed response, my ex-husband, Brad, is frustrated and anxious. 10 million. You said your sister would inherit everything, didn't you? Although my ex-husband confronts me, I deftly evade his accusations. When I look at my sister, Kimberly, standing at the entrance of the living room, her face is clearly filled with regret. Kimberly, do you have the will? Kimberly suddenly looks up, rifling through her bag, and pulls out a will undoubtedly written in our father's handwriting. I, meanwhile, produce the will that our father had given me from the back of a drawer. Wait, this is completely different. My name is Tiffany. I am a 25-year-old office worker. 2 years ago, I married Brad, my childhood friend who is 2 years older than me. I now live in an apartment about a 2-hour drive from my parents' home. My sister, Kimberly, who is the same age as my husband, lives in our family home without working. Our mother passed away due to illness when we were young, and our father raised us on his own. He was the president of an import company, and financially, our family was quite wealthy. Though I missed having a mother, I never struggled financially. And I am immensely grateful to my father for that. Kimberly, however, seems to be living a life of leisure, squandering our family's wealth. My father never harshly turned her away, nor did he press her to work. Of course, he would happily welcome me back if I chose to quit my job and return home. However, I have always wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, independent of my family. I worked respectably as a professional, lived off my own earnings, and married my childhood friend. It was the perfect life, like something out of a storybook. But all of that changed recently when my father passed away. He suffered a heart attack in his sleep and never woke up. When I heard the news from Kimberly, I rushed to my family home but couldn't accept the reality, even as I attended the wake and the funeral. I have few memories of losing my mother, as I was only 2 years old at the time. The loss of a parent as an adult felt like being torn apart. I hadn't even been able to repay my parents' kindness. Regret spilled from my lips, along with tears. I lamented not visiting my parents' home more often, even though I lived nearby. I should have seen my father more. I should have gone out with him more. Regrets kept accumulating in my heart. In stark contrast to my grief, Kimberly was extremely calm, almost to the point of cruelty. How much do you think the entire estate is worth? The estate? It's too soon to be talking about money after our father's death. In front of our father's portrait, Kimberly began discussing the inheritance as if she had been waiting for our father to pass away. With 5 million, one could live a life of leisure. Tiffany, make sure you share it with me, okay? Even my husband, who had come to my family home with me, said such things. They didn't seem human to me. Without mourning our father, they talked only of money. It was one thing for Kimberly, but I never expected my husband to be so heartless. There might be a will, right? Shall we look for it together after this? Sounds good. I agree. Their conversation seemed distant to me. I left the family home feeling dazed. I had the will. It was entrusted to me by my father while he was still alive. It stated that I would inherit $10 million, and Kimberly would inherit all the real estate. Perhaps my father, when writing this will, understood how recklessly Kimberly spent money. The immense fortune of $10 million would disappear in an instant if left to her. Thinking of Kimberly's welfare, my father must have decided that leaving her the income-generating real estate would be better. It was a sign of his concern for her, as well as his trust in me. So, how much did you end up getting? When I returned home, my husband suddenly asked this. You couldn't find the will? No, Kimberly found one, but she wouldn't show it to me. It was addressed to her, so she didn't intend to show it to anyone else. You have one too, right? Confused by my father's intentions, I wondered why he prepared two wills. Since Kimberly hadn't stormed in, the will found at the family home must not have been unfavorable to her. She would definitely prefer the $10 million over real estate. Could it be that the will I have is different? A possibility flashed in my mind. What I'm set to inherit is only $1,000. The rest is probably all Kimberly's. Brad's eyes gleamed suspiciously. Is Kimberly really inheriting everything? That's right. It was about $10 million, I think. I just remembered something I have to do. With that, my husband quickly left the living room, turning his back on me. His swift departure left me unable to follow, and I silently watched him go. From that day on, my husband began to treat me coldly. He frequently stayed out late without contacting me. And when I asked where he had been, he evaded the question, saying he was just out driving. Watching my husband, who usually leaves his phone in the living room, constantly carry it around, I began to suspect him of infidelity. However, without concrete evidence, time just passed by. A month after my father's death, when I returned home after working late, I noticed the lights were on. It was unusual for Brad to be home at this hour. At the entrance, I saw a familiar pair of women's shoes. Opening the living room door, I saw my sister, Kimberly, leaning affectionately on Brad. Welcome back, Tiffany. Without letting go of Brad's arm, Kimberly spoke to me. What's this about? I asked without even taking off my coat. I've decided to marry Kimberly. Brad stated it nonchalantly. Marry? But you're not even single. What are you talking about? That's why I'm divorcing you and remarrying Kimberly. It felt like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. Kimberly, sitting next to my husband, stared at me triumphantly. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. It seemed I had cried them all out when my father died. I understood why I wasn't as upset as I thought I would be. Did Brad truly love Kimberly? We had always been together since childhood, and Brad chose me as his marriage partner. Although Kimberly seemed to have had romantic feelings for Brad, his eyes were always on me. I knew the reason for Brad's sudden change of heart. Kimberly, are you okay with this? Because Brad, you know. Was it for the inheritance you were after? The words stuck in my throat as Kimberly's sharp gaze seemed to stop me from saying more. Don't be mistaken. Brad told me he loves me more than you. Do you understand? You've been dumped by Brad. As Kimberly sought Brad's agreement, he smiled softly at her. I felt dizzy. Along with my sadness, anger was bubbling up. Why did I marry such a man? My anger was directed more towards Brad, who took me away from my sister. Then towards Kimberly, who had been deceived by him. Brad was trying to get his hands on my father's inheritance by getting close to Kimberly. He pointed to the divorce papers on the table. All you need to do is sign these, so do it quickly. After saying that, Brad left the house with Kimberly. I was left alone in the spacious living room. I picked up a pen thrown on the floor and filled in the blanks on the divorce papers. Once the divorce was finalized, Brad and Kimberly fled overseas. They didn't need to do that. No one was going to take Kimberly's inheritance. And I certainly wasn't going to chase after them with resentment. After they disappeared overseas, I called the family to verify the will. The relatives were shocked and confused by how different the wills were. It seemed the wills held by Kimberly and me were complete opposites. Kimberly must have been overjoyed when she found the will at our family home. She was about to receive $10 million. She must have been trembling with joy. I compared the will I brought with the copy of the will Kimberly left. Someone gasped. Comparing the two, a flaw emerged. My father understood Kimberly's nature well. There was no other explanation. A year later, Brad and Kimberly suddenly returned to the country and came to my house. As soon as Brad saw me dining in the living room, he raised his voice. "Hey. Why hasn't the money been transferred yet? What's going on? Transferred? What are you talking about?" Contrasting with my calm response, Brad was frustrated and anxious. $10 million. You said Kimberly would inherit it all, right? Brad confronted me, but I smoothly evaded him. Looking at Kimberly standing at the entrance of the living room. Her face was clearly filled with regret. "Kimberly, do you have the will?" Kimberly looked up abruptly, rummaging through her bag, and pulled out a will undoubtedly in our father's handwriting. It clearly stated, Kimberly inherits $10 million, Tiffany all the real estate. I produced the will that I had received from our father from the bottom of a drawer. Reading the text, Tiffany inherits $10 million, Kimberly all the real estate. Kimberly's face contorted. Wait, this is completely different. Kimberly let out a cry like a scream, comparing the two. Snatching the will from my hand, Brad quickly skimmed it and began to tremble. "The one you're holding is fake. Kimberly is supposed to inherit $10 million. Right. You must have written it yourself." I let their accusations slide off me. Look closely. It's clearly Dad's handwriting. And the fake will is the one Kimberly is holding. My calm statement stopped them in their tracks. A will without a date is invalid. Did you know that? I showed Kimberly and Brad the will I had, with our father's signature and the date of creation at the bottom. In contrast, Kimberly's will had our father's signature but no date of creation. Dad knew Kimberly would be blinded by $10 million and wouldn't check the date. He planned it, knowing she wouldn't run off with the will until the inheritance distribution began. Kimberly collapsed to the floor on her knees. "So, what I received is..." "Yes, not $10 million, but real estate. Dad left all his real estate to Kimberly, as written here." Of course, all the relatives confirmed it, and that's how the inheritance was settled. Kimberly, realizing she won't be receiving $10 million, tears welled up in her eyes. Brad seemed unable to accept reality, but suddenly, as if struck by a thought, he brightened up and spoke to Kimberly. "Real estate is way better than money. $10 million will be gone if spent. But real estate will keep bringing in money as long as it's rented out. We can live in leisure forever." Brad's encouragement finally got Kimberly to start thinking. Her face flushed with excitement. "Right, I got myself a gold mine." Unfortunately. My voice cut through their joy. Far from a gold mine, it's a negative legacy. Kimberly's face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean? Haven't you seen the news?" "Oh, you were overseas, so maybe not." I took a deep breath and announced. "The real estate Kimberly inherited is now worthless. The area around Dad's properties has had its redevelopment stopped and now nobody lives there. I went to see it myself. It's like a ghost town. Completely deserted." I continued to confront the reality-denying pair. Kimberly, you haven't paid the inheritance tax yet, have you? You might even be hit with a delinquency tax. If that happens, selling all the real estate might not even cover it. The faces of Kimberly and Brad paled rapidly. You're kidding. The debt in Hawaii too. Kimberly finally broke down in tears. According to Brad, believing they would receive $10 million. The two had extravagantly spent money they didn't have, even incurring debt while overseas. But a year passed, and there was no sign of any money being transferred. The debt repayment deadline was only getting closer. Pressed by their dire situation, they hurried back to Japan to check the circumstances. Brad, sneaking glances at me, approached me with a cajoling voice. Hey, do you think we can start over? I realized I really do love Tiffany. I brushed away the hand Brad extended. In an instant, he discarded Kimberly. As soon as he realized $10 million was with me, he changed his tune. I don't think we can start over at all. You're just after the money, aren't you? No. I really do love Tiffany. Then what about when you said you loved me more than Tiffany? Was that a lie? Kimberly glared at Brad in disbelief. Who would fall for a jobless, indebted woman like you? That's terrible. You were deceiving me. Their verbal fight escalated rapidly. Honestly, it was out of control. They no longer cared about me, just hurling insults at each other, wearing themselves out. I wondered if I should tell them the truth. After some thought, I spoke up. Sorry to interrupt, but... Oh, have you decided to remarry me? No. I just wanted to let you know that I don't have $10 million anymore. It's not here, and I don't want you counting on it. Not there? Kimberly blinked in surprise. I bought a condominium that's scheduled to start construction. The rest, I donated. So, no matter how much you search, there isn't a single penny left with me. The two stared at me in disbelief. After inheriting $10 million, I quickly paid the inheritance tax and pondered what to do with the remainder. I could have donated it all. But it felt wasteful to let go of everything my father left me without using a bit. This spring, I bought an entire condominium building near the station that's due to start construction. Unlike Brad, I thought having real estate income would secure my future. The rest I donated to an organization for children who lost their parents. Even though I was fine after losing my mother because my father was a company president. Most people aren't that lucky. Doing this eased the guilt I felt for growing up in a privileged environment. I can live on my own earnings, on my own strength. I'm not like Kimberly, who lived off our parents, or Brad, who tried to ingratiate himself with the wealthy. They looked crestfallen, but I had no intention of offering a helping hand. It was all Kimberly and Brad's own doing. Well, my words brought a hopeful gaze. I didn't say I'd help. Let's start with calculating the taxes. Then, sorting out the debts. Don't worry, you'll manage somehow. I declared cheerfully, but the two looked at me with despair. Eventually, their combined tax and debt payments amounted to $3 million. The real estate Kimberly inherited was almost worthless, bringing in only a tiny amount. The bigger problem was the overseas lenders. They had come all the way to Japan to collect, leaving the two constantly worried about being found. They seemed to be moving around the country, working day jobs. They had repeatedly asked family and relatives for help. But everyone said it was their own fault and refused to assist. Of course, there were practical reasons too, like not wanting to attract the attention of the lenders by helping recklessly. I continued to work busily at my company. But the condominium I purchased gave me some financial breathing room in my daily life. On my days off, I volunteered with children from single-parent families, leading a fulfilling life. Recently, there's been talk of me taking over my father's company. The person who succeeded my father as president has been suggesting that I should take over. I've put off my answer, citing my lack of experience. But I'm thinking of taking over my father's legacy once I've gained more experience and matured.